Humanity is an interesting beast, as we have the capability to shape and destroy the earth as the very gods we pray to. But we also hold dear the instinct of an animal that keeps us in a constant state of conflict. Society has been a staple of humanity for its entire lineage, and said society has only been capable because of the introduction of wealth. And wealth is power. Economic systems are the driving forces behind politics at any time in history, and today we will be covering exactly that, starting with despotism. Jurisdiction is inherently human, and it goes back thousands of years, even before 4000 BC during the time of the Sumerians, where kings reigned over the collective of city-states that made up their domain. Despotism is the absolute rule of an individual over others, and in the conditions of anarchy that humanity was born in, the designation of complete authority was the height of intellectual thought for thousands of years. The progression of said thought came about in regards to determining what constitutes somebody worthy of this absolute power, and we will begin to see this with monarchism. Now, when it comes to the evolution of economic systems, it's important to understand that just because one system becomes more prevalent doesn't mean that previous systems go away. In fact, they all come to evolve, and this is evident with monarchy, as unlike despots, monarchs must abide by a certain line of code. One of the first monarchies ever regarded in history goes back to the ancient Egyptians, around 3000 BC, with the pharaoh Narmer. It is often thought that monarchies get their power from religion, and while that is true, the flow of wealth has a great deal to do with it as well. When land was established as a commodity that can be bought and sold, it ensured that the value of currency would forever be consolidated. The power that monarchies have held isn't from a God-given right, but instead from the control that is established from these individuals giving claim to land. Soon, this idea of ownership would unfortunately spread on a large scale towards capturing members of humanity. A slave-wielding society is a belief that was expanded most during the Roman Empire and their reign that began around 625 BC. While their political classification as an empire was a democratic republic, the notion of democracy will always become a puppet to economics. Of course, the exact economy of ancient Rome is hard to put precisely, as the prosperous agrarian society developed quite a bit over its multi-century run. However, the concept of holding slavery dear was always consistent, and this is likely why the founding fathers of America studied Rome so closely. The prosperity of Rome was found with their mass use of forced labor and democracy that convinced the non-enslaved population that they were free. Humanity has always had an infatuation for shaping the world in our vision, but the process of doing so was always a result of involuntary labor, dressed up as an intellectual act for the creations it produced, and we would see more of this use of servitude with the development of feudalism. Feudalism is the concept of lords being able to lay claim over land and manage the peasantry that lives on it. It can be claimed that the system began around the 5th century, but it is debatable exactly when it emerged. Although, feudalism certainly came after the fall of the Roman Empire, as it is a system that was inspired by the slave-master power dynamic that was seen during its reign. Now, one authority leader cannot provide an account for the lives of the growing population during this time, meaning individuals could own land and allow people to live on it so long as they worked under the rule of the landlord. A slight evolution from traditional slavery, as the peasantry that worked the land felt as if they lived there for themselves. The concept of more people attaining power was deemed a step forward, but as we know now, true progress will come when all power is consolidated within each and every one of us. The beginning of that path began when every person had the opportunity to one day be the oppressor, by the individualistic trading system that was mercantilism. Following the Black Plague, Europe's population was severely reduced as a result of the ravenous disease. This was the first instance of humanity pushing for an evolution of economics in response to a tumultuous time. Mercantilism began around the 16th century and promoted individualistic trade that first saw the world reach frequent connections between far-spanning lands. Additionally, it promoted payment for specific practices of labor, as the decreased population needed an incentive to maintain the workload that was seen before the plague. This led to goods being spread from all across the world, and the displacement of native populations in search of more resources, both of which would be heightened in its successor. Capitalism was largely a response to the Industrial Revolution and the new trading capabilities that were seen as a result of mass production, first introduced in England around the 18th century. The system itself is characterized by its promotion of private property, which is defined as land that generates wealth, like factories or farms, of which they would be within the hands of elite individuals. In comparison to the systems that came before it, capitalism was the most progressive. However, it is a system that has the intention of generating infinite growth, an idea that seems excellent, until the perils caused by capitalistic imperialism are seen. Capitalism cannot provide for itself, and so like a parasite, it seeks to take resources elsewhere in the name of sustaining itself, which is why the proposal of socialism was an inevitability. Socialism, of the scientific variety, is the first instance of economics that was proposed not by the elites, but instead by the common man. Starting with Karl Marx around the 19th century, it was a purposeful step away from the line of thinking that was, and still is, considered to be right. Capitalism is an evolution of mercantilism, feudalism, and the rest of the atrocious systems that came before it. Socialism, on the other hand, was developed to purposely cover the areas of provision that capitalism sorely lacks. Its proposals for private property, which again is land that generates wealth, to be in the interest of the common man, rather than of the select few. Said process is done by a government that is by the people and for the people, in which all operations are under the jurisdiction of the state. No longer would goods be produced for a market. Instead, when the people themselves have a need, they will be free of begging the elites to get involved. Socialism by no means is perfect, as it relies entirely on the construction and maintenance of the government. Now, the use of a one-party state is under the same line of thinking of a no-party state, where individuals meet not on behalf of the people, but of the citizens. A brilliant proposal that would be ruthlessly attacked a century later. Before socialism reaches a status as the most common form of economics, fascism would first have to fall, as the last line of defense for the capitalist class is a total seizing of power on behalf of the elites. The most prominent instance of fascism is its conception during the 20th century in the midst of the Second World War, in which Germany, Italy, Japan, and the rest of their allies were defeated by both capitalists and socialists in a brutal multi-continental conflict. Now, fascism is often categorized in the same classification as socialism, despite them being opposite ideologies. The circulation of currency under fascism is the same under capitalism, as the wealth will always trickle upwards. In fact, it will occur with the state and the means of production being seized in order to keep the working class in check. The utilization of a one-party state is where most comparisons lie, but the future of all human politics will be within the concept of national unity. While fascism uses a lack of political division for racial and economic supremacy, it is socialism that uses it to protect the working class. Wealth has always been the defining determiner of a person's value, and with our current system and the amount of wealth that is able to be accumulated, the capitalist elites are at a place of power that the feudalist lords they progressed from could only imagine. The realization of economics on behalf of the working class is only a recent discovery, as it was only proposed less than 2 centuries ago. And economic systems last multiple lifetimes, but given how much opposition is already seen to our current system, we can expect a sooner end. However, unlike previous transitions through economics, it will not be a gradual shift. It will be from revolution. And it is not a dinner party, or writing an essay, or painting a picture, or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. And given the increased speed at which we've seen economic thought being able to develop, it is clear that another wave of attempts at evolving our system will occur at some point in the future. And when it does, the change will be rapid. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Thank you.
Porque ¿qué ha resuelto el capitalismo? No ha resuelto ningún problema. Ha saqueado el mundo, ha dejado toda esta pobreza, Ha creado estilos de vida y modelos de consumo que son incompatibles con la realidad.